or rather we are not taking that short break, but we are able to revisit our top story. Remember, we told you of that humanitarian crisis that is unfolding across the country, with the floods having killed several people right now, 64 to be exact, and 150,000 others displaced. Abbas Gullet is always at the forefront of any crisis in this country. He's the Secretary General of the Kenya Red Cross, and he now joins us this evening from here in Nairobi. Abbas, good evening, and I want to start with the plight of these displaced families across the country. Could you tell us a little bit more about their situation? Many, of course, we understand have been rendered homeless, and what intervention is the Kenya Red Cross offering at this time?
So thank you, Anne. What I want to say is that indeed, yes, about 27,000 households and 147,000 individuals are displaced in about as many as 13 counties around the country, and the worst affected county is Tana River. And indeed, there are many displaced people, and unfortunately, a lot of them are out in the cold, and a lot of them are also asking for assistance. We've had to ferry people by boats along the Tana River and other areas, and I think the major needs are now, hopefully the water will subside, but we know these areas rains will continue, and along the Tana River we also know that additionally it's rains that are upstream in Mount Kenya region, in Nyeri, in Meru, in Embu, and it's just the downward flow of the water along the Tana River. So, but there are 13 counties where people are displaced, right from Mandera, Wajir, Garissa, Isiolo, Marsabit, Tana River, a bit of Kilifi, then we have Kano, Plains, we have Kisumu, we have Homa Bay, we have Busia, and we even have Narok and Kajiado that have been also affected, and Turkana also at the same time.
Yeah, and Abbas, you know, it's really disheartening to imagine what these families are going through right now, you know, with little children, the rains still pounding, and, you know, a devolution conference is underway. What, in your own assessment, would you say has been the response of county governments to the plight of their people?
Well, I would say some county government have tried, but maybe we need to actually do much more. And I think also the media this time around hasn't really picked and highlighted on the plight of these many Kenyans. And I think something needs to be urgently done, because a lot of areas that are basically completely washed out. Access by road is impossible, so it's only by air, and by air in many places it would be choppers. So my plea to the government and is to both the military and the police to avail their military and police choppers so that we can drop medical supplies and essential food items to these populations that are completely cut off, and some have been cut off for weeks. For example, the rain started way back on the 3rd of March, and up to now it's raining. So there are areas that have been totally cut off, areas of Modogashe in Isiolo and Garissa, areas of Tana River, both Tana North, Bura, and even the Delta, where we have to use small boats to get people out and evacuate them. So, but access is a major issue, and that's something that I would plead both central government and county government. And now at the level we're going, we would probably have to declare a national disaster, and that only probably then the head of state and the central government should do that. There are a number of counties like Nandi where they are talking of as a county declaring a disaster, calling upon then the national government to help. But I think, yes, devolution meeting is very important, but I would have said, how much are we going to spend on this meeting? And should some of these funds not have gone for responding to those who are out in the cold now?
Abbas, am I hearing you correctly that you have not been able to reach any of these? I believe you're saying 150,000 people, that all of them have not had any basic assistance yet?
Well, there are some who have had assistance, but I'm saying it's not sufficient, and we need to do much more. But there are some areas that is not accessible by road, it's only accessible by air. And I know last weekend there was police helicopters that went to Modogashe and to Merti from police headquarters that picked some supplies in Isiolo, Red Cross supplies that were actually delivered by the members of parliament, and it was a support from central government. What I'm saying, we need to see much more. I call upon the central government to avail more of air support, both military and police helicopters, to reach these most difficult areas that we can't reach by road at the moment. And you've seen on many of our roads, even the Mombasa highway this weekend that was really cut off in Sultan Hamoud, and there are many other places. A number of these people who have died because of their cars being washed out and people not being careful driving through the rains. So we are pleading with people to be more cautious, especially motorists. But I'm saying in terms of response, we need to do much more as county government, who have the fundamental responsibility for disasters. But if it is beyond them, then they should call upon the national government to come in and help. And we probably need to appeal to the Kenyan public to also donate, because we are giving shelter materials. We would ask the government to give food, both the county and central. But I think this whole issue of the disaster policy and disaster law in the country need to be urgently finalized, and resources must be allocated for this emergency, both at county level and at central level. There are some counties that have done quite a bit of work. We were in Nyeri last Friday, where the people who were displaced, and of course Meru, Tharaka Nithi, and many other areas. But I'm just saying that we need to pay more attention now as both county and central government to avail more resources urgently now. And what we are doing as Red Cross, our little resources are also depleted.
And you heard loud and clear. I want you to give us perspective, because obviously there should be long rains setting in, and there is the possibility of having, you know, perhaps unusual amounts of rainfall pouring. But how much would you say that poor workmanship and just the state of our infrastructure has further complicated this issue? I mean, just this evening we're reporting on, you know, the Narok Maimahiu road being cut off, and that has happened severally when the rains have been pouring. You've talked about, you know, roads being swept away, bridges being swept away, that lack of access. To what would you attribute it? Is it the extreme weather conditions, or do you think that partly our, you know, the state of our infrastructure further makes, you know, the situation worse?
Well, I think I would say both, and certainly this weather, you know, earlier the prediction we had, we were going to have normal and slightly above normal in some areas and below normal in some areas. What we are seeing now is actually continuous rain, and it's going to continue even this week and until probably mid-May is when the rains would subside. So I think we should be prepared even for more flooding in more areas. But the whole issue of infrastructural destruction, we are seeing that where our infrastructures have not been very well done, then we are seeing what we've seen in Maimahiu several times. It could be said to be, you know, is it a movement, a shifting of the earth, I mean the Rift Valley and all that. But certainly, yes, on the issue of our infrastructure in certain areas, especially of the older infrastructure, not the recently built brand new ones, there is a challenge, and I think that we all can acknowledge. But what we are saying is, all said and done, you would see the destruction in terms of you know, properties of people, in terms of the road themselves, but in terms of crops and animals that are affected by this current rain is going to be huge after all when we take stock of the situation. So what we're saying is that, you know, these are things that are predictable. We can't be in where we are every year, day in, day out. I mean, year in, year out. What we're having now, we just came out of a drought. I mean, we've been having drought until these rains. Now we have the rains, we have flooding. We are not harvesting the water that is now being a menace to all of us. And a few months down the road, you can bet your money, July, August, September, we'll be crying we don't have water. There's drought in certain places. So where has this whole rain system or weather system beaten us as a nation? And we've talked for this for years, year in, year out. Every second year there's drought, there's flood, there's drought, there's flood. Yet we're losing a lot of this water. And how are we going to say stop talking and acting differently to harvest the water and to also do things differently? We cannot be living from one disaster to another, you know, twice, 3 times in a year.
I think it cannot be better said than that. I just want to return to the families briefly. And as happens with any disaster, you know, there is that first moment when the appeal comes out, and you've even made one this evening for extra support, and people do respond to that, but we sometimes fail to see the long term and how situations like these affect lives and livelihoods for months or years to come. What would you say is going to be the impact of this floods on these 160,000 who have been displaced long term?
And, you know, the impact is simple and huge. People who had homes have been washed away. See, these are already vulnerable people, poor people in this very rural country, Kenya. So what we'll have to do is they have to rebuild their homes afresh. Who's going to build their homes for them? I mean, they don't have resources. Will the county government do this? Will the national government to do this? Would civil society and NGO do this? You know, every year we go through the same motion in certain places. Tana River, in Kilifi, in Kano, Nyando Plains, in Busia, Budalangi, you know, Isiolo, Mandera, Wajir, Garissa. You know, it's the usual suspect that come from one disaster to another. It's drought, it's conflict, it is flooding, it's health challenges when nurses and doctors go on strike. And I think we're dealing with these communities who their coping mechanism is totally depleted and totally eroded. Something must be done, affirmative action to help these people. I mean, I'm extremely happy to see the, you know, highway between now Isiolo and Moyale, super highway that have been built. If we had road infrastructure between Garissa and Mandera, you know, some of these communities could cope. They can do trade, they can do business. Today, it's impossible. So if now the road to Mandera is cut off, then we'll have to airlift everything out there. And in this day and age, I think government must give priority to some of these. But for the current flood victims, unfortunately, they would have to survive with the little that will be given to them. But I want to here seriously appeal for well-wishers. And I'm sorry, I know Kenyans are fatigued by, you know, this regular and constant appeal for assistance, and they would of course then blame the government, whether central or county. And we all must take responsibility. We must become our brothers and sisters keepers, because these are people who are very vulnerable today, very rural. They have plenty of water, not a drop to drink. And this water is also, you know, not clean water, not treated water. How many Kenyans today are getting clean treated water in their homes in terms of the entire population? If you get 60%, you are lucky. And we need to do much more than we are doing today.
Are you directly in contact with national government's first responders, if you like? Or what are you hearing from the National Disaster Management body?
Well, so what you need to understand, and there is under the Ministry of Devolution, there's NDMA, which is National Drought Management Authority, that will deal with droughts. In terms of floods, this would be dealt by the Ministry of Interior under the NDOC, National Disaster Operations Center. They would be the ones to then lead the intergovernmental ministries to then seek for support. And I think that's what probably that unit needs to do. They need to now have this assessment. We have an indicative number of people. The numbers could be plus minus little here and there, but we know where people are displaced. We know how now they've been in school, some have been in church compounds, some have been out in the open. If you go to Tana River, you go to Gamba, the irrigation scheme there on the road to Lamu is where people have been housed. We've given tarpaulins and small shelter materials, but very soon you will also have disease outbreak. We already had cholera before the rains, but now currently, and it is already, there's cholera outbreak in Tana River, in Garissa, in parts of Isiolo, in Busia, and with the onset of these rains, we will probably see more counties also having cholera outbreaks. So we also need to be prepared for health emergencies. So, and this, again, these are things that are known. You know, you can close your eyes and prepare for this annually and be ready to respond. So, of course, the onus is on the government, both the county as a first line of defense, and then the central government. The role of the Red Cross is auxiliary to both the county and central government. And here we all need to come together and have these plans always ready. When the alarm bell goes off, then we're able to respond immediately, but not to come back and all the time talk about the same thing over and over and over.
So I suppose that communication is something that will be necessary. Maybe it's not happening too well. But finally, Abbas, you know, we're seeing more and more the impact of severe weather patterns in the country, globally, really, and I know you've already spoken to the fact that this is something we can prepare for. What would you say should be the strategic interventions we should be looking at now, especially with the devolution conference underway and county governments being, as you have said, the first port of call, if you like, they should be the first responders. What should their strategic thinking be in terms of responding to this erratic weather patterns?
So climate change is real, Anne, and it is here to stay, and it's a phenomenon that we can't avoid living with, but it does not mean that we cannot cope with this situation. It doesn't mean that as a nation we cannot respond to these emergencies, whether man-made or natural, and this is natural now. And we're saying that in the devolved government, disaster management is a fundamental responsibility of the county government. They have a certain capacity. They need to have disaster law and disaster bill and disaster policy for each county. They should have their own strategic grain reserves for food, for example, each county, so that when there are disasters and emergencies in their own counties, they can respond holistically in terms of water, in terms of health, in terms of sanitation, in terms of food for that matter. Okay, number one. Number two, when it is beyond, and when there are disasters, they can declare a disaster in the county. The governor can declare a disaster for the county and ask for partners to support that county government in dealing with this. These are things that we can pre-plan before a disaster occurs. The same way at a national level, when it is beyond the capacity of a county and when more than one county is affected, then of course the central government can and should also have its own national disaster law, disaster policy, disaster bill. There should be agencies responsible for this disaster management. If it's a government NDOC, NDMA, it can be through the Ministry of, and I think in a bigger way, it should be actually under the Office of the President, Ministry of Interior, because that's where provincial administration lies. And with the provincial administration, they are coordinating on the ground with various actors, partners, county government. So from that perspective, if the law is there and the policy is there, then we put the framework of the agencies responsible. Then actors like Red Cross and other NGOs that are appropriate can then be tasked by the government to implement this for and on behalf of the government. We don't need to see a feeling that there's a competition between the government, whether county or central, and this civil society and NGOs. Because if you see in the developed world, that is why you have the Oxfams and the CARE and the World Vision of this world, who are foreign-based or NGOs who now come and operate in our countries. What our own country should do is to promote our own local NGOs and CBOs, promote them, build them, strengthen them, then give them tasks to act for and on behalf of the government. Is it even easier from an implementation perspective? The government becomes a policy maker and it's also there to monitor and ensure compliance. Then my work as Red Cross would be as auxiliary to the government to implement for and on behalf of the government. Give me resources to do the work for you, and we will be able to manage these disasters very easily.
You feel the government should be funding the Red Cross directly? And other agencies, not
well,
just
the government used to finance Red Cross previously, before independence. During the first regime of President Jomo Kenyatta, we were fully funded. The first half of the President Moi's government, we were financed, but we lost it somehow at that time. And since then, we haven't been financed by the government. We collaborate and work very closely with the government. The head of state is the patron of the Red Cross by practice and tradition, and we are saying that indeed the government should finance its Red Cross, because worldwide this is what happens. And the work of the Red Cross as auxiliary to the government implements disaster management and response to emergencies when they occur with funding from its own government.
Abbas Gullet, the Secretary General of the Kenya Red Cross, thanks so much for your time, and we are taking a short break. We're back with the sport after this.